Snow fell in delicate, perfect flakes outside the Whitmore estate, the kind of postcard scene that looked almost rehearsed. Inside, Clara Whitmore stood in the living room she'd grown up in, a cathedral of chandeliers, marble floors, and expensive silence. Her pulse beat in her throat as she reached for her mother's hand. "I have news," she said softly, the corners of her mouth trembling with hope. "I'm pregnant." For a second, the room froze. She expected a gasp, maybe tears. Maybe Evelyn Whitmore, the woman who built her world on appearances, to smile through surprise and reach out to hug her only daughter. Instead, Evelyn's diamond earrings caught the light as she tilted her chin. Her eyes were sharp, cold, surgical. "You're dead to me now." 5 words, perfectly enunciated. Each one landed like a hammer against glass. Across the room, Charles Whitmore, Clara's father, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair but said nothing. He always said nothing. And on the couch, her younger brother Ryan smirked down at his phone, half amused, half relieved that for once he wasn't the disappointment in the room. Clara's breath caught in her chest. "Mom." What Evelyn stood, her voice controlled as ever. "You've embarrassed this family for the last time. You and that man. You're out of the will. Clara, I want nothing more to do with you." The word man landed like dirt thrown on a coffin. Clara felt the air drain from her lungs. For 3 heartbeats, she just stood there, watching her mother pour herself another glass of champagne. Her father pretend to read the paper, her brother scroll through memes. Then, something inside her shifted quietly. Decisively, she reached into her purse, pulled out a small, perfectly wrapped Christmas gift tied with a silver ribbon, and placed it gently on the coffee table. "Merry Christmas, Mom," she whispered. No one spoke as she turned toward the door. Her heels clicked against the marble like punctuation marks final. Certain. Outside, the cold air hit her face, and for the first time in her life, it didn't sting. It felt clean. What none of them knew, especially Evelyn, was that inside that innocent-looking box lay the truth. A truth powerful enough to shatter the perfect little kingdom Evelyn Whitmore had built for herself. From the outside, the Whitmore family looked like a magazine spread elegant dinners, charity galas, manicured smiles. But behind every perfect photograph was Evelyn Whitmore's obsession with control. To her, reputation wasn't just important, it was religion. Clara had learned that early. Growing up in a house where affection was earned through obedience and silence was safer than honesty. Evelyn, queen of the Portland Women's Foundation, thrived on attention. Every luncheon, every event, every whispered compliment about her grace fed her like oxygen. "We're not rich, Clara," she'd say. "We're respected, and that's far more fragile." It was her mantra, carved into the family's unspoken rules. Clara's father, Charles, played his part, the quiet architect of his wife's image. He'd once been kind, she remembered, before decades of marriage turned him into Evelyn's shadow. He kept his head down, managing investments, ensuring the Whitmore legacy remained intact. And Ryan, the youngest, floated through life with the confidence of a man who'd never faced a consequence. Evelyn called it potential. Clara called it delusion. At 28, Clara had built a life that looked nothing like her mother's blueprint. She'd become a registered nurse, choosing the chaos of hospitals over the sterile calm of charity luncheons. Her mother called it working-class rebellion, but for Clara, it was freedom real, exhausting, beautiful freedom. Still, every time she crossed the threshold of that immaculate house, the air seemed to tighten around her ribs. The walls carried Evelyn's voice, even when she wasn't there, whispering reminders of how a Whitmore should behave: stand straight, smile carefully, marry up, and never, ever mix with people who get their hands dirty. Clara used to think she could live with it, that love and family meant compromise. But as the years passed, she started to see the cracks in the foundation her mother guarded so fiercely, and those cracks, hairline at first, were about to split wide open. Because freedom, Clara would soon learn, always comes with a cost, and Evelyn Whitmore had no intention of paying it. Clara met Marcus Reyes on one of those nights that felt like it would never end. The hospital was understaffed, the fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of antiseptic clinging to everything. He came in with a gash on his shoulder from a motorcycle accident, nothing life-threatening, but enough to earn him a night in the ER. Most patients in pain were impatient or scared. Marcus, somehow, was neither. He smiled at her through the sting of disinfectant, cracking jokes about her steady hands and the 5-star service he was getting. He wasn't like the men Evelyn paraded in front of Clara at every fundraiser, the clean-cut lawyers and trust fund bankers who measured worth in stock options and last names. Marcus was all warmth and color, long dark hair tied back, tattoos tracing stories down his arms, laughter that made people turn their heads. He asked about her. Not her family, not her status, it disarmed her. Over the next few weeks, he stopped by the hospital once more for a checkup, then invited her for coffee as a thank you. What was supposed to be a casual outing stretched into hours. He talked about his life, his Mexican-American family, the small tattoo shop he dreamed of opening, the art that gave him peace. For the first time in years, Clara felt seen, not displayed. Evelyn found out through a friend from the country club. Of course. The call came the next morning. Icy, sharp, surgical, a tattoo artist. Clara, really, you've spent years cultivating an image, and this is what you do with it. Clara tried to explain, to describe Marcus's kindness, his humor, his heart, but her mother wasn't listening. She never did. That week, Evelyn sent flowers to the hospital orchids, her favorite symbol of refinement with a note attached. Even beautiful things can wither in the wrong soil. Clara kept the card, not as a warning, but as a promise that she would never let her mother dictate what love should look like. Marcus had once told her, "Ink can't be erased, but that's what makes it real." She didn't know it yet, but that truth would define everything that came next. Because loving Marcus wasn't rebellion anymore, it was salvation. Sunday dinners at the Whitmore house had always been performances, crystal glasses, linen napkins, and conversations sharp enough to draw blood. That night, Clara sat beside Marcus at the long mahogany table, her fingers laced tightly in his beneath the cloth. The scent of roasted duck filled the air, but it couldn't mask the tension. Evelyn Whitmore, perfectly poised at the head of the table, examined Marcus the way a jeweler studies a stone, searching for flaws she already believed were there. "So, Marcus," Evelyn began, her voice sweetened with civility. "Tattoo artistry, that must be creative. Do you find it stable?" Marcus smiled politely. "It's art, Mrs. Whitmore. Stability depends on passion and hard work, not just income." Charles Whitmore, hiding behind his wineglass, added without looking up, "And a good retirement plan. I hope Ryan snorted into his mashed potatoes. Guess the 401k looks different when it's inked on skin." Huh. Clara's hand tightened under the table. Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm saving," he said calmly. "I'm also planning to open my own studio next year." "Ambitious," Evelyn murmured, "though I imagine the clientele isn't quite our circle." The silence after that was heavy, broken only by the clink of silverware. Clara's stomach churned, but Marcus kept his composure, answering every question with a kind of grace that made her both proud and heartbroken. He was fighting to be seen, while everyone else was fighting to make him small. When dessert arrived, Evelyn leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You know, Clara, when your father and I married, we had the same values, the same vision for our future. That's what builds a real partnership." Clara met her mother's gaze, or destroys one. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ryan stared at his phone, pretending not to hear. Charles cleared his throat and mumbled something about coffee. After dinner, while her parents moved to the sitting room, Evelyn cornered Clara in the kitchen. "I'm saying this because I love you," she whispered, the words brittle. "But you are making a mistake. People like him don't elevate you, they anchor you. Think about what you're giving up." Clara turned off the sink and faced her mother squarely. "Maybe I'm finally giving up pretending." That was the night the lines were drawn, invisible but permanent. And while Evelyn thought she'd won by making her disapproval clear, she didn't realize that dinner had changed something fundamental. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't afraid to disappoint her. The performance was over. After that dinner, nothing at the Whitmore house felt the same. The phone calls started small, Evelyn checking in under the guise of motherly concern, asking if Clara was still seeing the artist. But soon they turned sharp, threaded with guilt and condescension. Every conversation was a subtle interrogation. "Do you ever worry about the kind of people he spends time with, or a nurse's schedule is already difficult? Darling, can you really build a life with someone like that?" Clara tried to brush it off, but the words followed her like static. Even her father, Charles, began echoing his wife's doubts, though softer, cloaked in logic. "Your mother just wants the best for you," he said one evening over dinner, eyes down. "She worries he won't understand our world." "Our world," Clara repeated, the phrase tasting bitter. At the hospital, she found solace in the chaos patients who didn't care about last names or legacies, just compassion and competence. But the moment she came home, Evelyn's voice was waiting on voicemail, layered with disappointment, and every missed family gathering became another accusation of betrayal. Ryan, meanwhile, became the family's echo chamber. He'd call Clara late at night, pretending concern but fishing for gossip. "Mom says Marcus's shop is in a rough neighborhood. You sure it's safe?" Then he'd laugh, always ending with, "Hey, don't shoot the messenger." Clara began to see it clearly. Her mother's need to control wasn't about love. It was fear. Fear of losing the illusion she'd built, the perfect daughter who validated her social standing. Evelyn wasn't fighting Marcus. She was fighting the mirror he held up to her. One night, Clara stood in her tiny apartment, staring out over Portland's glowing skyline. The city lights shimmered like broken glass. "Beautiful and dangerous," she whispered to herself. "She doesn't get to define me anymore." But deep down, she knew the war had only just begun. Evelyn Whitmore didn't surrender control. She eradicated whatever threatened it, and Clara had just become her newest enemy. The proposal happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of ordinary evening that somehow changes everything. Clara came home from a double shift at the hospital, exhausted, her scrubs smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Marcus was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring pasta sauce while music played softly from an old speaker. The light was warm, unpretentious, nothing like the glittering coldness of the Whitmore house. When she walked in, he smiled that quiet, grounding smile. "Dinner's almost ready," he said, "but I need to ask you something first." He reached into his pocket, suddenly unsure, his usual confidence replaced with something fragile. Then, right there between the simmering sauce and the hum of the city outside, he knelt. The ring wasn't a diamond. It wasn't even traditional. It was handcrafted two birthstones woven into a delicate band of silver and gold, their colors meeting at the center. "I can't promise you perfection," Marcus said softly, "but I can promise you real." Clara didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, tears already falling. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Later that night, she called her parents. Evelyn answered. Clara expected surprise, maybe grudging politeness. Instead, there was silence. Then, the slow exhale of disbelief. "You're throwing away your potential," Evelyn said. "You're choosing a life of mediocrity, and when it falls apart, don't come running home." Charles's voice entered faintly in the background. attempting diplomacy, maybe a long engagement. Just to be sure, even Ryan joined the chorus, snickering from somewhere behind the receiver. Guess love doesn't buy a retirement plan. Clara hung up before she started crying. She and Marcus married 6 months later in a small garden surrounded by his family and her friends from the hospital. The air smelled of jasmine and freedom. Evelyn attended, wrapped in pearls and disapproval, refusing to smile for a single photo. Charles looked older, smaller, as though caught between two worlds. When Clara kissed Marcus beneath the string lights, she felt an odd mixture of joy and mourning joy for what she'd chosen, mourning for what she'd finally let die. That night, as the guests danced and Evelyn slipped away early without saying goodbye, Clara realized she'd crossed a line she could never uncross, and for the first time, she didn't want to go back. The morning of Clara's wedding was quiet, sunlight spilling through thin curtains of the small garden venue. There were no grand carriages or society photographers, just the scent of wildflowers and the laughter of people who loved without pretense. Marcus's mother adjusted Clara's veil with tears in her eyes. "He's waited his whole life for someone like you," she whispered. When Evelyn Whitmore arrived, she looked like she'd walked out of a magazine. Pearls, gloves, a dress the color of winter. She greeted no one, offered no congratulations. She sat in the second row beside Charles, her posture flawless, her face expressionless. To her, the ceremony wasn't a union, it was a scandal. Marcus's vows were simple, trembling but sincere. "You make the world make sense," he said. When it was Clara's turn, her voice broke on the word home. For years, that word had meant a mansion full of cold chandeliers. Now, it meant the man standing before her. As they kissed, a cheer rose from the crowd. Evelyn didn't clap. She simply stood and walked away before the first dance began, her heels clicking against the stone path like a metronome of disapproval. Charles followed after a moment, glancing back once, guilt flickering in his eyes. That night, under strings of warm lights, Clara and Marcus danced barefoot on the grass. Around them, laughter and music swelled. Yet even in her happiness, Clara felt the echo of her mother's absence, a shadow at the edge of every joy, reminding her that freedom always costs something precious. 6 months after the wedding, Clara found herself staring at a tiny pink line on a test strip in the bathroom of their apartment. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she laughed, half in disbelief, half in wonder. The timing wasn't perfect. Money was tight. Marcus's shop lease was still pending, and she was working double shifts, but when she placed Marcus's hand over her stomach that night, his eyes filled with tears. "We're really doing this," he whispered. "We're going to be a family." They spent the following weeks wrapped in quiet joy, late-night nursery ideas, gentle arguments over names, a new tenderness blooming between them. Clara told herself her mother would soften. Surely, even Evelyn Whitmore couldn't turn her back on her first grandchild. Hope can make fools of the wisest people. When Clara finally called, Evelyn's tone was polite, distant. "You wanted to speak to me." "Yes," Clara said, her heart pounding. "I wanted you to hear it from me. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed stretched into something suffocating. Then Evelyn's voice returned, sharp enough to cut. "And you're proud of that." "Of course I am," Clara said, her voice trembling. "You're going to be a grandmother." Evelyn sighed a sound of pity. "Not joy, Clara. There are options. You don't have to let one mistake define your life." The words slammed into her like a slap. "You mean end it?" Evelyn's voice didn't waver. "You're not thinking clearly. Imagine what people will say. This isn't the life we raised you for." Clara's tears came hot and fast. "You didn't raise me to live. You raised me to perform." That was the last time she spoke to her mother in months. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped. Even her father's short texts grew colder. Ryan sent the occasional joke about diapers and destiny, but nothing more. At night, Clara would lie awake, one hand on her stomach, wondering if her child would ever know the warmth of a grandparent's love. She wanted to believe people could change, but Evelyn Whitmore was made of marble, beautiful, cold, and incapable of bending. Still, Clara couldn't know that her mother's cruelty had only begun to reveal itself. The next time they met, it wouldn't be over the phone. It would be face to face, under the glow of Christmas lights, where love and hate would finally collide. By December, the city glittered with holiday lights, but Clara felt none of the warmth that used to come with Christmas. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly a visible promise of a future her mother refused to acknowledge. Evelyn had stopped calling entirely, and the silence had become its own cruelty. Ryan's mocking texts came less frequently now, though everyone still stung. Only her father, Charles, sent the occasional message short, careful, written like a man afraid of being caught. Hope you're feeling well. Your mother's busy this season, busy pretending Clara no longer existed. Marcus offered to skip Christmas altogether. We can stay home, he said. Make cocoa. Ignore the world. But Clara shook her head. No, she whispered. I need to look her in the eye one last time. She wanted to believe that maybe if Evelyn saw her daughter carrying the next generation of the Whitmore line, something human might break through the frost. But part of her already knew the truth. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. So Clara began to prepare not just for the confrontation, but for what would follow. On her laptop, she started gathering files, bank transfers showing Evelyn's misuse of the family trust, charity funds quietly redirected to Ryan's consulting projects, and the legal amendment to her late grandfather Henry Caldwell's will. He had left a sealed inheritance for Clara, one meant to activate only if her mother tried to disown her. Clara hadn't told anyone, not even Marcus. Then she printed the documents, placed them neatly in a silver box, and wrapped it with elegant paper. On top, she tied a white ribbon. It looked harmless, beautiful, even the kind of gift Evelyn would appreciate. Late at night, Clara sat by the tree, the glow of the lights reflecting off the ribbon. She imagined handing the box to her mother, imagined Evelyn's face when she opened it. The thought didn't bring satisfaction, only a strange, aching calm. This isn't revenge, she whispered to the baby inside her. It's the truth, and it's the last thing she'll ever get from me. Christmas morning would be their reckoning, and for the first time, Clara wasn't afraid of losing her family. She was ready to let them go. Christmas morning arrived bright and bitter. The city hushed under a sheet of frost. Clara drove alone through the quiet Portland streets, the silver-wrapped gift resting on the passenger seat beside her. Marcus had begged to come, but she'd kissed him goodbye at the door. This is something I have to finish myself, she'd said. Her breath fogged in the cold as she turned into the long driveway of the Whitmore estate, a place that once meant safety, now just marble and memories. The house was immaculate, as always. The wreath on the front door was symmetrical, the garland perfectly arranged, not a strand out of place. Evelyn Whitmore opened the door before Clara could knock. She looked regal in cream and pearls, her expression carefully neutral, the way one greets an unwelcome reporter. "Clara," she said, as if tasting the word for the first time. Inside, the scene was painfully familiar. Charles reading the paper by the fireplace. Ryan sprawled on the couch, scrolling his phone. Clara sat across from them, her belly obvious beneath her wool coat, hands folded to keep from shaking. For a few moments, they spoke about traffic and the weather, pretending normal still existed. Then Clara took a breath. "I wanted to tell you in person," she said quietly. "You're going to be grandparents. The baby's due in February." The silence that followed was so deep she could hear the ticking of the mantel clock. Evelyn's face hardened, her jaw tightening before her voice sliced through the air. "You're dead to me," she said. "You and that bastard will never carry this family's name." Ryan snickered. Charles lowered his eyes to the paper, his cowardice deafening. Something inside Clara went still. Not broken, just still. She reached into her bag, took out the silver box, and set it gently on the coffee table. "Merry Christmas." "Mother," she said, "you've always wanted control over everything, so here's your chance to control the truth." Then she stood, adjusting her scarf, and walked toward the door. No one stopped her. Her heels clicked against the marble measured "final" outside. The cold air bit at her skin, but it felt like freedom. Snowflakes caught in her hair as she reached her car. She didn't cry, not yet. Behind her, in the perfect house she was finally leaving for good, Evelyn Whitmore stared at the unopened box on the table, beautiful, innocent, waiting, and inside it, wrapped in ribbon and justice, the truth waited to shatter everything she'd ever built. 3 days after Christmas, Clara's phone rang. It was Evelyn's lawyer. The moment Clara heard his voice, she knew her mother had opened the box. The man spoke carefully, as if stepping through broken glass. "Mrs. Whitmore would like to discuss certain documents you provided." Clara smiled faintly. "There's nothing to discuss," she said, and hung up. Inside that silver box had been the quiet destruction of Evelyn's Empire financial statements showing her misuse of family trust funds, evidence of Ryan's secret allowance disguised as charity donations, and the final will of Henry Caldwell, leaving his private inheritance solely to Clara. A single letter sat on top, written in Clara's looping handwriting. "You taught me that truth was weakness. I've learned its power." By the end of the week, Evelyn was removed from her board positions. Charles filed for divorce. Ryan disappeared from social media, the family name crumbling under whispered scandal. Clara sat by the window, hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick for the first time. The city outside was quiet, blanketed in snow. "It's over," she whispered to the life inside her. "We're free." And for the first time, she truly was. 2 months later, Clara gave birth to a baby girl they named Grace Reyes. The hospital room smelled of lavender soap and new beginnings. Marcus held her hand through every contraction, whispering that he loved her, that she was stronger than anyone he'd ever known. When the baby's first cry filled the room, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not pain, not fear, but peace. Grace was everything her mother had never been able to see, pure, loved, unconditioned. Marcus's family crowded the waiting room with flowers, laughter, and homemade tamales. They weren't rich, but they were present. They celebrated Grace as if she were a miracle, and in a way, she was proof that love built without permission could still bloom. Evelyn never called. Charles sent one hesitant letter, unsigned. Clara didn't respond. She was done trying to heal a family that had chosen pride over love. One evening, she stood by the nursery window, the city glowing beyond the glass. Grace slept against her chest. Warm and steady, Clara whispered, "You'll never have to earn love. My darling, you'll just have it." And under that quiet promise, the cycle finally broke. 8 months after Grace was born, a knock echoed through the small Portland house. When Clara opened the door, Ryan Whitmore stood there thinner, unshaven, and looking nothing like the golden boy he once pretended to be. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then his eyes fell on the baby in Clara's arms. "She looks just like you," he whispered, voice cracking. He told her everything. Their parents' divorce had finalized. Evelyn had been exposed for diverting tens of thousands from charity accounts to fund Ryan's lifestyle. Their father had left, furious and humiliated. Evelyn's name was now whispered at the club like a cautionary tale. "She blames you for all of it," Ryan said quietly. "But I don't." Clara hesitated before letting him inside. Over coffee, Ryan admitted he'd been wrong, that he'd let their mother turn him into a coward. "You were right to walk away," he said. When he left hours later, Grace reached for him, tiny fingers curling around his. Ryan smiled, tears in his eyes. "I'll do better," he promised. For the first time, Clara believed him. Not everyone from the past was meant to be erased. Some just needed to wake up. A year after that final Christmas, Clara stood barefoot in her backyard under strings of golden lights. Friends gathered around tables filled with food and laughter, Marcus strumming his old guitar, and Grace toddling between everyone's legs, her giggle carrying into the night. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't marble and chandeliers, but it was home. They were renewing their vows that evening, not because they needed ceremony, but because they wanted to mark the life they'd built from the ashes. Marcus slipped the same handcrafted ring onto her finger. "You saved me," he said softly. Clara smiled. "No," she whispered. "We saved each other." From the porch, Ryan watched quietly, holding Grace. He had kept his promise, steady job, his own apartment, and a heart learning how to love without conditions. He'd become the uncle Clara had hoped for, proof that change was possible even in broken families. When the music softened, Clara looked up at the stars and thought of her mother, not with hate, not even sorrow, but clarity. Evelyn had built her world on appearances. Clara had built hers on truth. One had crumbled, the other endured. As she held Marcus's hand and Grace's tiny fingers curled around hers, she realized the real Whitmore legacy wasn't money or name. It was the courage to love honestly, no matter the cost. And for the first time, Clara Whitmore felt completely free.